Now here is an image taken straight from a discarded Purim Spiel brainstorming session. Bar and Bat Mitzvah, judged by Simon Cowell. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome, Bruchim Abiyim. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. You have found Beit Virtuali, and let's stir up a little Torah together. Now, slightly pandering thumbnail aside, I am actually going to get back to Simon Cowell. I think that his part to play is kind of important. But yeah, regarding that image, go ahead and just reject it out of hand. Except for when I said it, some of you were at home giggling, thinking, oh, I am such a bad person for finding this amusing. Or maybe if your imaginations were slightly more tangible and you had just the tiniest bit of schadenfreude, you said something more like, I am sure glad that hell belief is non-normative within Judaism. But all of our shadows aside. Of course, this image is absurd because we do support our youth. Supporting youth is a bedrock value invested in mitzvah, our sacred obligations, and every, or just about every synagogue will go way above and beyond themselves to help youth get to the finish line, regardless of how complicated and demanding that learning process may be. Usually, the demands and expectations are high, while different youth have radically different learning styles and modalities. And yet I would put the majority of shuls out there on the absolute bleeding edge of pedagogy. I have seen us go through amazing feats of creativity to make this liminal moment achievable and accessible. And even if we don't necessarily think in terms of the underlying sociological power of the B'nai Mitzvah, we know that something is going on there that makes a difference. Most Homo sapiens have celebrated coming of age via the first hunt or the onset of menarche. At some point, Jews chose to celebrate coming of age, coming into adult responsibility via intellectual endeavor, community leadership, communal responsibility, language acquisition, and accepting the role of teaching as well as being taught. In a hunter-gatherer society, an act such as the first successful hunt would demonstrate the ability to directly and tangibly contribute to the survival of the tribe. The idea of this in Judaism means that at some point we recognized our intellectual contribution to the Hebrew version of the hunt. Intellectual endeavor as the tangible proof of the contribution to survival. And oh yeah, by all measures of history, Jews should not exist, yet we still do. There is an argument to be made that this has served us quite well. For those wishing to do away with this Jewish cornerstone for various reasons, I wonder how much the larger swath of history has been considered. Touching the centrality of B'nai Mitzvah in Jewish life seems to me to be an absurd risk. But stepping back from specifically Jewish thoughts for just a moment, I want for a moment us to explore the decades of fascination in the Anglo world that we have now had with the aforementioned Mr. Cowell. Since season 1 of American Idol in 2002, US Americans simply could not get enough of this man. Yes, part of the obsession came from some mixture of rubbernecking and schadenfreude, but there is something deeper. Don't forget that the reasons that the top of this exploration, the first words that I uttered in the teaser at the beginning of this video, pushed us into a place of collective discomfort is that I juxtaposed the idea of Simon Cowell's brutal honesty with that of our sacred B'nai Mitzvah celebration. You know, our youth up there on the bima, the Jewish religious stage. It is not an image that is worthy of what the bima represents, most especially the pillars that youth in Judaism represent. And yet part of the gestalt of Simon Cowell includes, well, how many youths of about that age that he has judged over the course of the years. Some have been brilliant, many have not. Simon Cowell isn't exactly known for pulling his verbal punches, and yet somehow we know that parents have sent their children to stand in front of someone who would speak with their child in a way that they never would. What is happening? An answer at the archetypal level can not only be found in the story of Abraham and Sarah and company, but as well the ways that we pass on the narratives inside Parshat Lech Lecha and the meaning of the words Lech Lecha, you shall surely go forth. It is not accidental that many a B'nai Mitzvah celebration has been accompanied by Debbie Friedman's Lech Lecha, playing with and expanding on the message. This feels like the perfect sort of encouragement to give to a 12 or 13-year-old. Go forth to a land that I will show you, to a place you do not know. On your journey, I will bless you. And then we repeat the encouragement, which for those of us in the Jewish professional business do actually hope and believe in these moments of celebration, and you shall be a blessing. We sing it because we hope it. It is neither empty nor arbitrary. Many of us have just spent months, if not years, working with a particular youth, getting to know their minds right as their minds make that shift. From the childhood literal focus on the literal self as the center of the universe, to the fully forming human asking the hardest and coolest questions, and then watching them engage in that dialogue as their minds expand into being able to see the world in addition to what they've already learned symbolically and metaphorically. It is extraordinary, and of course we can parallel that with the lesson from the beginning of Lech Lecha as the Eternal calls out, "Go forth from the land of your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing." Yes, thank goodness our society has evolved beyond the need to send out our youth at B'nai Mitzvah age to forge their own life. What was once the actual and literal movement from the status of child to adult today translates as adult responsibility for the mitzvot. And then our youth get a few extra years before that previous level of existential responsibility is forced on them. But what parent in that moment that their child is called to Torah for the first time does not have that wish of their child's name being great? That from within our 21st century analogies, that their now Jewish adult will become the part of something great. What better message could we give them than the underlying message of Lech Lecha? Except, I'm not sure that actually is the message of Lech Lecha, and that's kind of the problem. The "you shall go forth" message occurs in verse 1 of the Parsha. Verse 2 contains the great nation idea. Verse 3 shows the first kind of hints of what Lech Lecha actually is. We read, "I will bless those that bless you, and I will curse the one that curses you." But hey, no biggie. That's just biblical language, right? We can go ahead and let that one slide. Verse 10, however, has the famine that is so severe that Abraham and Sarah, still at that time Avram and Sarai, needed to leave Canaan. The land that they were told to go to 10 verses ago. The next 11 verses contain one of the most horrific and morally problematic narratives about our ancestors this side of David, and Bathsheba, and Uriah, where Avram forces Sarai to pretend to be his sister in order to save his life as the famine forces them into Egypt. There is simply no way to make the underlying story of this narrative anything other than horrible, and I will not dignify the actions by describing them euphemistically. It is bad. And then after this, we get 4 whole verses of the whole great nation thing and mention of wealth and Abraham's continued religious devotion. He builds an altar. Before we then get to the Lot narrative, or at least the first part. Lot, the story of quarreling with relatives that don't get along, and the setup for the later narrative of Sodom and Gomorrah, pillar and salt, the usual. I get the Lech Lecha teaching as we use it in B'nai Mitzvah. Part of the evolutionary deal that we made when we traded claws, fur, and speed for oversized brains was that our offspring needed to be protected, whereas foals and fawns need to be up and about right quick. We pass on our genetic material when we have been successfully raised and then can successfully raise another, meaning the parents that can nourish and protect provide not only the genetic material for future generations, but as well the archetypal. The Torah does indeed acknowledge this, yet from within a society where coming of age meant leaving the house, our extending the fullness of parental protection into the 3rd decade of life is a completely novel solution for humanity that extends the protection, absolutely and without question required for pre-B'nai Mitzvah ages, into post, and also requires us to ignore both how we evolved and the deeper wisdom of Torah. Part of the power and enduring nature of Torah is that it is much more a reflection of human reality than it is human aspiration. We aspire to be a great nation. We aspire to be a blessing. And after Torah reflects this aspiration, we immediately are faced with the reality of life. The first famine occurs. This is followed by our first reckoning that we have the potential to be the lowest, worst versions of ourselves. This is followed by the unpleasant reality that all of us are challenged by getting along with all of our relatives all the time. Singing Lech Lecha is a great way to honor our aspirations. But when sung without the rest of the story being a part of the larger educational process, we start seeing the need for, Simon Cowell. From within this novel experiment of extended parenting, we also see the emergence of imbuing verses 1 and 2 of the Lech Lecha story into the narrative hopes of our children while ignoring the rest. Those of us of a certain age were told, often in unpleasant ways, exactly what we could not be when we grew up. Remember guidance counselors? Our generation's version of them were the tail end of a less forgiving reality. Survival for most of human history required most people to fit into the predetermined needs of the tribe, which often flowed through the family. If my parent made the best spearheads, then it was only logical that I would be taught this. That function is one absolutely required by the tribe. And I, growing up in the same hearth as the flint knapper, meant that my exposure from day one made me the ideal candidate to ensure this necessity fulfilled in the needs of my generation, after which I would, without question, try to pass that on to my child. And what if I just wanted to sing? Well, it would take until the last generations of human history for that desire to be any realistic possibility at all. So many of us were told what we could not do for the wrong reasons or in the wrong way that we rebelled, and we developed the doctrine of universal support. Of course you can do that. If you just want it bad enough and try hard enough, you can do anything you want. You can be anything you want. That was problematic enough, even if it came with good intentions. But eventually we have even dropped the "if you try hard enough" part. Because singing, for example, requires work. A lot of it. It also requires at least a modicum of base talent. I mean, from that standpoint, I'm sure it's probably easier to be born a prodigy, but ask the great violinist Hilary Hahn how many hours a day she still practices, in addition to how many hours a day she practiced while she was said prodigy. Those of us with, well, in my case, a minor singing talent, how much more so we have to practice to develop any level of listenability, proficiency. And then this part has to be said without saying, "I'm sorry, but." This has to be done without apology, although tone is very necessary. If someone is tone deaf, for example, it simply doesn't matter how much we want it or how much we dream it. And if any of these last few sentences has made any of us uncomfortable, this speaks to just how profoundly we need to challenge how we pass on the Lech Lecha narrative. Our "you can be anything you want" came as a corrective to our people who told us "no way," with not always the best tone, skill, or intentions. And it also was a result of us losing the courage to have hard and realistic conversations with those that most needed to hear those conversations from us. No matter how hard I wished it, there are some things I could never have been, as is the truth for every single human being who has ever lived and ever will live. Finding those boundaries and moving past them to thrive. It's part of the beautiful and terrible contradiction of being human. When we cannot do this and communicate it, we end up outsourcing our parenting and our teaching to Simon Cowell. He is so a part of our Anglo collective consciousness that we can easily hear him saying,
"Thank you. No."
If you got in, I think they'd throw you out even before you sang.
That whole audition was something I would expect to hear outside Magic Mountain. You have the potential, but you need a lot of work.
why was that necessary to begin with? If we're talking about what's uncomfortable, and we don't want to be uncomfortable, how comfortable is it to have our face on national television looking dumbfounded as someone tells us for the very first time in our life that we can't sing, that we have no singing talent whatsoever? Someone failed. And the answer to the question, who failed, can only be answered when all of us, collectively, look in the mirrors. All of us has played some part in this, either from refusing to have the hard conversations or for being the person who was so cruel that we went the other direction. Lech Lecha, as it's taught, is symbolic of all of this, especially as Lech Lecha, as it actually appears when you read the whole thing, contains within it the required truths to get past this and navigate through it. We must leave the house of our parents. We must go from the known to the unknown. And as soon as it happens, we will, no matter how much we wish to ignore, hide, obfuscate, or flat out lie about it, we're going to encounter adversity. And the simple truth is that as hard as teaching the fullness of Lech Lecha earlier, as those moments arise can be, the hiding, obfuscating, or lying about them means that when the lesson is finally forced upon us, as it 100% will be, someone who knows us and cares about our soul far less will be in charge of providing the lesson. We have outsourced collectively the conversation that no, we cannot sing, to Simon Cowell. The iterative questions that clearly arise from Lech Lecha regard how we have learned and how we teach or are teaching Lech Lecha. If we believe in this moment that we have the right to living a life free of adversity, then the result will be even greater adversity. And worse, the possibility of finding ourselves part of behaviors or even groups that claim that all that negatively impacts in our life comes from something else. It's the fault of another. From within the role of parent or teacher, we are called at some point to have the difficult discussion. Luckily, we have evolved. We have learned, and so we have the possibility of doing this today, or a greater possibility of doing this without unnecessary cruelty. The very act of having the conversation can feel cruel, but is instead an act of kindness that can be done cruelly or lovingly. From within the mystical language of Judaism, a malach or a malchit, a messenger or an angel, has been given the job of moving us onto the path where we are the most elevated versions of ourselves. And when we are called to be one of these malachim and choose instead to step away, that job's going to be given to someone else. Nowhere in the twin messages of go forth and you shall be a blessing is contained the subscript of going forth is easy and being a blessing means never engaging in honest and realistic dialogue. We need to ask the hard questions of which version of Lech Lecha we are living and passing on. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We'll see you next time. And if you are still here, depending on when you were watching this, Beit Virtuali is once again starting up live Friday evening services, Kabbalat Shabbat. This is tailored for people more in North America now, although if you are in Europe or Israel and you want to also have these at our time, let me know. I'll be streaming early in the morning, which will be 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time and 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time, live streaming Kabbalat Shabbat. If you don't have a place to go to, if you're unable to leave, if you just want to meditate through a completely musical service and close your eyes and pray and sing along, join me and we will be for each other this Lech Lecha week a blessing. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Blessing, you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing, Lech Lecha.